Welcome back, everybody, and please welcome James Thomas to centre stage again. I'd like to introduce James to you formally. James is the founder of the Australian Wind Construction Collective and the driver of this conference. He's the Director of Risk Services Australia, a company that assists companies to manage risk effectively. James has multiple formal qualifications in safety, crane operations, supervision and specialised lift planning, which underpins a track record in achieving strategic outcomes in safety performance on multinational portfolios and multi-billion-dollar projects. Please welcome James Thomas to the stage.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks for your time. This, I suppose, presentation is 2 years in the making. It's, I suppose, again, the presentation I'm giving is a culmination between the benchmarking report that we reviewed in September of last year, a draft of which went to a couple of colleagues in Wind, and it then also is in context to, from a shared position, what the key elements of a major project framework are. From a, I suppose, I'll just throw up some, and before I start talking to that, I'll just share with you the presentation that we walked through. So further to previous discussions, this presentation is a culmination between recommendations on a framework for major wind projects and in context to a benchmarking exercise conducted by the Australian Wind Construction Safety Forum. The key elements that we're going to talk through, I suppose, if we just go to the next slide, Kieran, is that there's no, I suppose, it starts from the right question that we have to ask. And most frameworks are built from a compliance and legislative compliance perspective. I had a job interview and worked an executive role, or safety manager role rather, for a government agency out of New South Wales. And the interview process involved this question and a presentation to deliver against this question. What, given the risk profile and values of your organisation, would be an appropriate due diligence framework? And I thought, what would be the specific activities that would discharge this obligation? A very good question. The challenge I have as a professional in wind and a professional in construction is that I've seen firsthand that we can have compliance and unsafe sites in terms of how do we audit, how do we monitor, and that, I suppose, dry tone of all behind that framework is a punitive approach of legislative punishment if we happen to hurt somebody. I do call it a legislative administrative compliance, where there's a focus on the paperwork put in place to protect people. A values-based framework, when you, for example, look at, as Pierre spoke of, competency versus experience, when you look at the supply chain and fulfilling the procurement for a leadership team for a major project, for instance, are there limitations on costs? Are we working to a parameter of cost for placing those roles? Or have we unpacked the risk profile, understood the experience warranted from the professionals monitoring that risk profile, and procured those specialist roles from that perspective? So when we walk through the framework, it's from the eyes of a father, a husband, a friend who has worked these projects, that understands to manage risk, there needs to be, as Pierre says, a degree of making it personal. We need to fully understand the risk profile and be serious and genuine in how we manage it, as opposed to from the perspective of, will this protect us from legislation? And to that end, look, 5 key areas at a very high level, and we go into some greater details, are from conducting an organisational assessment. Is it suitable for your project? And from a PC and a client perspective, on your framework, do you need to, for argument's sake, have a contract specification? Do you want to create value and have a behaviour-based safety program? Do you want to have a leadership alignment workshop? Do you see the value in aligning your leadership and your supervisors? Do you see the value in having a strategy for a 3 and 4 year project? When I say assess the applications of tools in tower, I talk about how do we, I'm just going to go through here, how do we apply our risk management tools? How do we apply our leadership engagement, safety engagement, safety conversations. How do we engage our safety coaches who are technically competent and experienced in the installation methodologies to be in turbine, having those conversations with crews of mixed experience? And further to that, how do we create communication and a safety culture where our technicians are talking to our leadership in terms of their resources and their tools required, engineering aspects of the machine, the suitability and of lift hoists that are applied, some of the challenges with lift hoists where some of the canvas bags are wearing out on one site, so they just keep them in the steel boxes, and then they can't actually translate them between the two, so they end up just hauling the kit up to the first level to the lift, take the equipment up the lift, then drag it up to the yaw deck and up through the yaw deck into the nacelle, because now we've effectively made the lift hoist too hard to use. Having that engagement in the turbines gives us greater understanding at even a corporate level down to the site leadership level in making sure that our technicians are both listened to but resourced adequately. The third recommendation is suitability of standards. A lot of companies have standards. Are they suitable? A lot of companies have more than one. I've been on one site where they had 3 permits to work. They just didn't know which one they were using. To that end, do we assess those within our planning processes? Do we assess those in a high-level risk workshop at a PC level, and as a client ensure that they do assess the suitability of those procedures for your project? And second last in the report was the assess your specialised lift planning and your wind turbine installation key risk. What are the methodologies? What is a good lift plan? What are the key roles, lift authority or supervisor? And last but not least is your fifth being your supervision roles and responsibility in monitoring the work. What do you mean by that, James? Well, the PC is very different from the client, and then the contractors themselves are different. There's various lines of supervision. What are their roles? Do they issue work permits? I certainly was on one site recently where the contracting constructor, PC, were issuing permits from a desk. Certainly didn't check the method statements, nor were the drawings attached. And to that end, that's not industry best practice in terms of issuing permits to work for excavations. These are the things that then, even for the install of turbines for crane companies, what's the role of PC in overseeing that? And there is a degree of confusion there between some advice in industry saying the High Court said we don't need to know about it, and I'm speaking plainly. But the phrase I do hear in industry all the time is, I'm not a crane specialist, I don't need to know about that. And my quoted response on the day was, well, go home. If you're the PC and the crane's the specialist, go home. Why are you here? You don't need to know what an overbite is. You don't need to know, I suppose, some of the more particulars of the lift, but you would, as a principal contractor, need to have a broad understanding of their system of work, enough to monitor it so that when they're assembling the crane, you know that they're working to the right method statement and reviewing their manual. Thank you, Nicola. I didn't bother Kieran and the team here today by going through those 5 particular slides, just so that we could close that off. But I'm sure through the forum we can expand on that further. Claire and I did the bulk of the work for the report, and I have been asked, are we going to issue the report? At the moment, the position of Claire and I is that the report is quite thorough. It is not a cookie cutter. It's from the perspective of the greater industry, and when an organisation has a look at what's suitable for them, it's not a tablet from Moses just handed over. It needs to be assessed in line with their project. It needs to be assessed in line with their capacity, their financial capacities, and their existing values and objectives for what they want to achieve in terms of their reputational risk and their project risk. So at this stage, I'm just encouraging people to reach out to Claire and I for further information. Thank you for your time.
And everybody does have your contact details, and we'll be able to reach out to you for more information or a presentation regarding that report, as you've just said, James. We do have some quick questions to go through before we go to our sponsor presentation. With the contractor oversight in partnership, do you think that the clients should be setting the tone for that conversation in a more robust way?
Yeah, look, I absolutely hold that position. I spoke about the definition of complacency then, where The Cambridge definition of complacency is confidence in what we do that prevents us from trying anything different or trying harder. I'm yet to see an announcement in wind on a strategy that's improving safety or something we're doing differently in terms of workforce engagement, creating value in workforce engagement. And from that end, I believe firmly that it's the client that has that influence. I believe that's the mining sector where these wind farms are starting to be announced, that they're going to be asked, they work to a very high standard, and they'll be asking those same questions that I do. So I firmly believe the client's in the position to affect that change. Now, if the principal contractors and the OEMs shift their positioning to a point of an improvement strategy, I'm not suggesting they're doing anything wrong. I'm suggesting there's opportunities for improvement, as we've just discussed. But certainly, from a complacency perspective, it's my faith is in the clients. Yeah.
And as they're setting up the project, a key element of that would be establishing rescue planning and scenarios for those major incident potentials associated with the constructions activities. And I'm sure Claire will be speaking more to that point as well.
Yes, no, she will.
We've had early discussions when we were talking to Pierre Former about psychosocial injury and psychosocial risk. And we have had one of the delegation who unfortunately was quite badly injured in a vehicle rollover in project-associated activities quite some time ago. In my experience, something that industry can do quite poorly is support the greater family of that injured worker, the teammates, the extended family at home. We're all very focused on, I suppose, repairing the damage or fixing somebody. How well do you think it's developing in wind industry, that post-trauma counselling for the greater team to make sure that everybody's okay?
If we're talking about the well-being, we need to take it right back to the beginning. If we're talking about a baseline of respect for workers, a lot of the work that I did with Jolene and the key element of mobilising workers and values-based frameworks is that we need to reflect social values. One of the things working with Jolene is that I love her wording on baseline of respect and creating a culturally safe workplace for Indigenous workers. It's that respect for workers that we have for our family. We respect our family and we love our family and we want the best for our family. So when it comes to societal values in a notion of real care and making things personal, as Pierre says, then we look at things very differently. And when you talk about mental health, it starts there. It starts with having that baseline of respect for workers where they're coming to a site remotely. The question's asked how they get there, so there's a care factor. They're asked how they're doing their job, and the job's assessed to the point where they're trained adequately. They're not insecure and exerting false confidence to say, hey, I just did a facilities-based training and I'm coming in turbine. It's a little different. I'm not quite sure of this stuff, but then what's the quality of that buddy system? The emotional, psychosocial environment where the bystander effect, and we look up Sir Stanley Milgram, he did some great research back in the 1960s where we start thinking about how we intervene, but everything in our outward environment reflects on how we see ourselves and our position in that environment. So the bystander effect, am I confident? Do I know a solution? All of these stem from how we are engaged by that environment. And if we're not engaged in that environment, if we aren't respected, if we aren't supervised, if we aren't in an environment where we're promoted to ask a question, James, are you sure you know how to fit this harness? Any questions, James? How are you going with the install for the second cam, James? Notice this, that, or the other. That's a culturally safe environment for me. That's a baseline of respect. Then post-incident, to really give this question the respect it deserves, that just poses a lot of questions for me. Because at front end of day-to-day activities and high risk, if I know how that answer is going to be very different from my projects I've been on, then it opens the door for how would that then be the place for injuries and so on.